Okay, fantastic. So subsection 4, this is the part where we start to think about how we identify successful practice in our settings and how we share that. So in the PLP, ahead of today, hopefully some of you will have had a chance to have a look at these tasks, and I won't go through them in detail. I'll skim over them quickly. But essentially, in the PLP, it was asking you kind of, how do we define successful practice? Like, how do we measure it? How do we monitor it? How do we identify it? And so there was some activities in there asking you to identify good practice, successful practice in relation to ALN, and how it's defined, how you evaluate, and also then in terms of interventions, how do you measure the effectiveness of an intervention? How do you choose an intervention? You know, and if we're choosing interventions because they're considered effective interventions, based on what is the evidence? How are we measuring it? And then activity 6, then the last of the activities in this section, was asking you to reflect on the mechanisms for sharing practice within your settings. So a key part of the ALN core role is about monitoring, measuring and ensuring successful practice. And this is one of those strands where that role has really kind of broadened out to a much more kind of leadership perspective. And we need to think about the sorts of terms that we use around, you know, successful practice, best practice, effective practice, excellence in practice. You know, are all of these things the same thing? Do they mean the same thing, or do they have slightly different connotations? How are we measuring if something is best practice? Is that the same as something being successful practice or effective practice? So we really need to think these through, especially when we're framing stuff within our settings. So successful inclusive practice in UK schools is now framed less as about additional needs provision and more about high quality teaching for all. And you will have come across that term over and over again in recent years, from the Eston reports to the Eston thematic reports to the ALN legislation. This strand of high quality teaching for all repeats. It comes up time and time again. Florian and Black Hawkins' inclusive pedagogy model, that really underpinned this idea of like high quality teaching for everybody, underpinned that Florian and Black Hawkins model, really going beyond kind of thinking about this is what's ordinarily available and then adapting for you know, a select few, to actually completely replacing that with this you know, inclusive pedagogy practice, where, you know, learning is kind of scaffolded and adaptable and flexible in the moment to meet everybody's needs. And in terms of evidence of effective practice, it often highlights these key strands around like universal design principles, universal design, you know, incorporating all of your learners, formative assessment, mixed attainment grouping, assisted technology, to personalise and access and foster autonomy. So those are like throughout lots of the documentation, those are some key kind of threads that arise time and time again. Sustained collaborative professional development, really helping to shift the kind of discourses and the beliefs, the attitudes part, as well as the expertise and skills part. And then key partnerships, you know, with family specialist services, really to kind of broaden that participation and you know, all enhanced by increased focus on learner voice. So the threads that come out is high expectations, responsive pedagogy, multi-agency collaboration, learner voice, and independent, with independent longitudinal research done. Those strands, the learner voice, high expectation, they all came out in your responses to that last task. So we can see that we have this kind of agreed awareness of what's needed. In that Eston 2024 report, they offered like a kind of list of what inclusive practice looks like. And that included quality teaching and learning, sharing of information, high and realistic expectations, research-informed practice, grouping arrangements, consideration of grouping arrangements, scaffolding and chunking, questioning, breaking things down into small steps, quality resources, quality and accessible resources, effective feedback, supporting learning and with interventions, and modelling conversations. So there's lots of those threads that we can see are considered effective inclusive practice. So then we need to think about, from a setting perspective, how do we share that knowledge and understanding? How do we share when something's going well and something's effective? How do we make sure that the right people at the right time get access to that information? So this model that we've shared here from CERAT 2017, it's about knowledge management, and it's basically highlighting the process, and from a kind of audit perspective of practice, this might help to shape some of your reflections on that. It offers a model for identifying the knowledge of best practice, how we then, where we put that, how we hold that, and where we put that, and then how we share it so that it can be used. So that's their kind of cycle of knowledge management. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick 5 minutes on this, and we won't have time to give any verbal feedback, but if you can capture some of your reflections on this before we go for the break, that would be fantastic. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. So we want you to reflect on what are the mechanisms used for sharing effective practice with others in your settings, and how could that be further developed? So really thinking about that mechanism for sharing within your settings. So Di's put the link in the chat. Thank you, Di. I will just stop the recording.